Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little strange, a little crowded, and very, very sleepy. You're standing in the narrow hallway of a Victorian townhouse, holding a candle that flickers each time you take a step. Your socks are damp, the floorboards creak, and behind the next door is your bed, or rather, your share of it. Because tonight, as in most Victorian nights, you are absolutely not sleeping alone. You push the door open. Inside, 4 people are already snoring, their bodies bundled under a single woolen coverlet that smells vaguely of coal smoke, lavender sachets, and someone's cabbage dinner from hours earlier. There's no space between them, no headboards, no dreams of privacy. You sigh, blow out your candle, and wedge yourself in, right between your cousin's knees and your older brother's sharp elbow. You probably wouldn't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're living in the 1800s now, and unless you're rich enough to own a country estate and a personal snoring chamber, you're likely sharing your sleep with someone, maybe 3 someones, maybe more, a spouse, a sibling, a servant, or a near-total stranger renting the other side of the mattress. No one asks for your sleep preferences. You just shuffle in, hold your breath, and lie as still as possible. And the bed, it's not gray. The mattress is stuffed with straw or horsehair. The sheets are stiff. There's a single pillow, if that, and it's flattened to the thickness of an old newspaper. The room is cold. Your toes are colder. And your roommate, you're not sure what her name is yet, has a cough that sounds like it's been aging in an attic since 1843. This wasn't considered weird. For most Victorians, sleeping alone was a luxury bordering on selfishness. A good bed was expensive. A private room was rare. Even in middle-class homes, children shared bedrooms and beds by the dozen, while live-in maids might sleep on floors, under stairwells, or beside the kitchen stove if they were lucky. Historians still argue whether this co-sleeping norm was driven more by necessity or culture. Was it simply because housing was cramped and cold? Or was there something more social, more moral, about huddling together in the dark? In this world, sleep is not personal. It's public. It's tangled limbs and whispered prayers. It's waking up to someone else's drool on your sleeve. And yet, there's something oddly comforting about the hum of shared sleep. A rhythm, a warmth. Because just as you're getting cozy, there's a thud, then a groan, then someone mutters, half asleep, about the chamber pot being too full. You clamp your eyes shut and pretend to be unconscious. It's safer that way. Meanwhile, in the room next door, the master and mistress of the house are sleeping in a bed that takes up half the floor. But don't imagine something too grand. This isn't Versailles. Their bedposts wobble. The sheets are often damp, and they might be sleeping apart within the same bed, separated by an invisible line of modesty and societal dread. Still, they have it better than you. Their fireplace crackles with the last scraps of coal. Yours went out hours ago. The damp is settling in. You curl tighter. Your cousin mumbles about rats in the wall again. You pull the blanket up to your ears and try not to think about the fact that rats were very real bedfellows back then. And as for nightlights, forget it. You've got a stub of a candle and maybe a dim street lamp leaking pale gaslight through a gap in the curtains. Every shadow looks suspicious. Every draft feels like a ghostly finger on your neck. But you won't complain, because complaining about your bed in Victorian times was like complaining that water is wet. Beds were uncomfortable. Sheets were scarce. Bedmates were a fact of life. You could swap them, sure, especially if someone died of consumption, which happened, well, a lot. But alone time wasn't part of the equation. Oh, and did we mention? You're probably still wearing half your daytime clothes. Nightwear existed, yes, but only for those with enough money to own something purely for sleeping in. You've got a heavy shirt, some long drawers, and a pair of socks that don't match. It's the Victorian version of pajamas, and it smells like whatever stew you spilled at supper. Outside the window, a carriage rumbles past. Someone yells in the street. The city doesn't sleep. And neither, it seems, do your bedmates. One of them has started snoring in a syncopated rhythm. Another is whispering the Lord's Prayer backwards, something about dreams and superstitions. And you? You're still awake, wedged between other people's warmth and the weight of 100 years of very bad mattresses. Welcome to Victorian bedtime. The air is thick with the smell of humanity, wool, oil, skin, and the faint tang of boiled onions lingering from dinner. You're not alone, and not just in the someone's foot is pressed against your thigh kind of way. You're part of a living, breathing tradition, the Victorian shared bed. And tonight, you get a front row seat to the theater of awkward intimacy. You shift under the covers, careful not to elbow your brother again. He already grumbled once and muttered something about sleeping in the stable next time. The bed creaks beneath you all. It's an old one, probably passed down through 3 generations and assembled without nails. You wonder how many other people have shared this exact spot, and how many secrets got whispered right here in the dark. That's the thing. Victorian beds weren't just for sleeping. They were forums, confessionals, even classrooms. In a room packed with siblings, cousins, or even the occasional paying lodger, bedtime was story time. You'd whisper about the neighbor who walked funny, or the boy in school who threw ink at the teacher. You'd swap ghost tales. You'd giggle. You might even plot a prank involving a dead mouse and Aunt Marjorie's slipper. There's no such thing as silence in this house. Every night is a chorus of snores, coughs, whispered confessions, and rustling straw. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, someone lets out a dramatic sigh and begins a half-coherent dream monologue. You try not to laugh. It only makes your mattress sharers more restless. Now, picture this. In rural areas, people often slept with complete strangers while traveling. It wasn't odd to show up at a village inn and be told, "Right then, you'll be top to tail with Mr. Jenkins tonight." No raised eyebrows, just a nod and a shared blanket. Personal space was a modern invention no one had dreamed up yet. Historians still debate the social boundaries of these shared sleep arrangements. Were they strictly practical? Was there a tacit understanding of where not to place one's feet? Or did familiarity breed tolerance, even tenderness, in these cramped nighttime negotiations? One quirk of the era: children were often used as insulation. Literally. If you were cold and had 3 kids, guess who slept in the middle? That's right, your smallest, warmest child. You, your spouse, and the baby formed a body heat sandwich, with flannel nightshirts and old quilts pressed into duty like medieval armor against the chill. In wealthier households, things got slightly fancier, but not necessarily lonelier. Even in big houses, children shared beds until well into adolescence. Some even bunked with servants. Having a room of your own was not a birthright, but a birthday gift. If your family had suddenly done quite well with lace exports or coal. And let's not forget, bed sharing is a sign of trust. There were cases of friends, sisters, even adult men, co-workers or companions, sharing a bed as a matter of course. Abraham Lincoln famously shared beds with other men during his law circuit travels, and no one at the time thought much of it. It was cheaper, warmer, and not at all suggestive. Your bed creaks again, someone sighs, and you're suddenly aware of just how close everyone is. physically, emotionally, and sometimes just too audibly. You consider turning onto your side, but that would mean breathing directly into your cousin's ear. Better to remain on your back, eyes closed, pretending to sleep, while your arm slowly loses circulation. Earlier that evening, you overheard your older sister whispering to a friend about a bedroom scandal. Turns out, a neighbor's lodger was discovered sleeping not with the family's teenage son, but with the family's books. He used a stack of encyclopedias as a makeshift pillow and claimed it helped him dream smarter. The family was scandalized, not because of the books, but because he hadn't told anyone he was planning to sleep in the drawing room. Privacy was less about what you did and more about declaring your intentions. That's the etiquette of Victorian sleeping. Announce yourself, make space, and try not to touch anyone's toes. One fringe detail that often gets forgotten: bed bugs. Oh yes, these tenacious roommates were so common that many people kept candle wax or powdered mercury on hand to persuade them to move out. You lie very still, suddenly aware that the slight itch on your calf might be historical realism crawling into your dreams. So you lie there, caught between the warmth of shared company and the suffocating knowledge that you are never truly alone. Not in this room, not in this house, not in this century. And slowly, slowly, as the whispering dies down and the snores grow louder, you begin to drift. Your brother's elbow has finally stopped jabbing your side. Your feet have found a warm patch, and your cousin has turned over, facing the wall, taking his terrible breath with him. There's still someone's leg draped across yours, but at this point, you've accepted it. This is sleep, Victorian style. Shared, shuffled, surrendered to in waves of half-light and full-body compromise. And just as you're slipping under, someone murmurs, half awake, "Did anyone remember to bolt the door?" The knock comes before sunrise. You jolt awake, not from rest, but from tension that never quite released. A soft rap at the wood panel behind the dresser, followed by a whisper, "Delivery for the mistress." And just like that, the wall moves. Okay, it doesn't swing open like in the movies. It slides, creaks, and hesitates, as if even the house is tired. Behind it, a pale face peeks through the servant's passage, eyes adjusting to the half-light. You blink. She blinks back. And then she's gone, off to light the kitchen fire or scrub chamber pots or whatever miracle kept this house vaguely functional every morning. This is your first encounter with the hidden half of Victorian sleep. Servants. Not the elegant kind from costume dramas. Real ones. The kind who woke before dawn and slept only when the house fell completely silent, which was never. And when they did sleep, they did it in nooks, crawl spaces, and furniture designed more for utility than comfort. The girl you saw, let's call her Ellen, shares a narrow cot with another maid, tucked behind the pantry wall. Their mattress is a bag of straw so old it crackles. There's no window. The only warmth comes from the kitchen below, and the occasional stolen candle stub. They sleep spooned together, both for heat and because there's literally no room to turn. Servant sleeping quarters is a generous phrase. In most homes, it meant whatever space could be spared, under the stairs, in attic crawl spaces, or inside what used to be storage closets. Some slept in shifts, trading spots with others who worked opposite hours. And if the master rang the bell at midnight, up they got, no excuses, no delay. Imagine being yanked from a dream to deliver a warm brick for someone's freezing toes. Historians still argue whether this sleeping arrangement was purely a class divide or part of a broader architectural philosophy. Were these tucked-away spaces meant to erase servants from view? Or was it simply practical, out of the way, close to the work, and just warm enough to not freeze to death? Let's not romanticize it. The servant class didn't nap in linen-sheeted elegance. They made do with scratchy blankets, reused hay, and the constant anxiety of being caught asleep on duty. But it wasn't all Dickensian gloom. In some houses, especially larger estates, the servants' quarters formed little communities. They played cards by candlelight, whispered gossip across shared beds, and found surprising comfort in each other's company. These were the only people who truly understood the rhythm of the house, who snored, who argued at breakfast, who secretly met in the garden after hours. And when the day ended, their beds, no matter how small, how drafty, became zones of shared exhaustion. Two maids in one cot, a valet curled on a footstool, a scullery boy sleeping under the table. Not because they wanted to, because there was nowhere else. You hear a muffled cough through the wall. Ellen again, probably already sweeping ash from the grates or polishing silver by lamplight. You wonder if she ever really sleeps, or just dozes in shifts like the rest of them. Not that your own bed is much better. Someone has rolled onto your arm again, and the blanket's gone missing. You tug at it gently, trying not to wake anyone, which is hilarious considering the human chain of contact it's tangled through. You give up and curl tighter. Meanwhile, down in the kitchen, the fire's been lit. You can smell it, burned bread crust, wet coal, and a hint of last night's drippings being reheated. That's the closest thing to an alarm clock you're going to get. You remember that the chimney runs right past Ellen's cot. On the worst nights, she probably fell asleep hugging it for warmth. It's no wonder people used to call their favorite spot near the hearth the poor man's bed. In smaller houses, there wasn't even this much separation. A single room might host the entire household, parents, children, lodgers, and the help, all packed into a multi-use space that served as kitchen, bedroom, and living room. One bed, one fireplace, and a whole lot of social negotiation. You stretch, trying not to disturb anyone. The cot groans beneath your movement, and a small shower of dust floats down from the rafters. Maybe it's ash, maybe it's lint, maybe it's just the house reminding you. Everything in here is old, tired, and surviving on borrowed warmth. There's something oddly democratic about Victorian sleep. Everyone was uncomfortable, just in different degrees. Whether you were the lady of the house or the chambermaid crawling under her bed to find a lost garter, nightfall brought no true relief, just shared suffering wrapped in flannel. And yet, you're getting used to it. You know when to turn over. You've figured out how to place your arm so it doesn't go numb. You've even accepted that the creaks in the wall aren't rats, probably, just the building stretching its bones. And through that wall, Ellen is doing the same, curling into her corner, blowing out the stub of her candle, listening to the muffled snores of a house that will soon demand everything from her again. You drift a little. The bed creaks. The servant's door clicks softly shut. The house sleeps on. The fire is out. You don't need to open your eyes to know it. The air has that sharp, metallic stillness of a room that's been slowly freezing all night. You take a breath and instantly regret it. The inside of your nose stings. Your lips feel tight and dry. And when you shift under the covers, your breath fogs into a tiny cloud and then vanishes. Welcome to the Victorian morning. Technically, it's still night, but in houses like this, the cold gets a head start. The tiny fireplace at the edge of the room gave up hours ago. The embers sighed, the smoke coiled upward, and then nothing. The room has settled into what Victorians called morning frost. You, however, might call it, "Why is my pillow crunchy?" You peek one eye open. Frost has bloomed in little starbursts on the inside of the window pane. You admire it for one sleepy second before realizing that yes, your water pitcher is turned to slush, and yes, your chamber pot has a frozen lid. Again. Coal was expensive. Wood even more so. Most families rationed fuel, saving their best heat for daytime or sick rooms. At night, the fire was banked, buried in ash to keep it from going out entirely. But unless someone got up to stoke it, spoiler, no one ever wanted to, the temperature in an average bedroom could dip below freezing. Historians still argue whether these brutal sleeping conditions contributed to the popularity of heavy nightwear and even heavier moral attitudes. Was modesty really about decency, or was it just another layer of wool against the cold? You lie still, unwilling to let in any more chill. But of course, someone kicks the covers off. You groan internally. Why are Victorian sleepers so bad at staying tucked in? You reach down, carefully reclaiming a scrap of blanket and rolling yourself into it like a burrito made of frostbite and resentment. The blanket smells like damp flannel and faint lavender. You try to ignore the itchy patch near your ankle. Hopefully it's just wool. Hopefully. And speaking of wool, beneath that blanket is another layer. A scratchy undersheet, then the actual mattress, which is stuffed with horsehair or straw, or sometimes wool scraps that have compacted into something resembling a doormat. Every turn you make sounds like a rustling scarecrow. Still, there were solutions. People in the Victorian era weren't entirely at the mercy of winter. They had tricks. Heated bricks were wrapped in cloth and placed at the foot of the bed. Homemade space heaters, basically. Bed warming pans filled with hot coals and slid between sheets were common, until the occasional fire broke out, of course. Some wealthier households had warming maids, yes, people whose job was to literally climb into a master's bed first to warm it with their body. This was especially common with the elderly or those considered too fragile for cold shocks. Imagine that being your job interview. Can you fold linen, polish silver, and lie very still while pre-warming the guest bed? A fringe practice emerged in colder regions. Sleeping with your boots still on. Not because it helped sleep quality, because the alternative was waking up to frozen laces and stiff leather you couldn't bend. In some homes, particularly among the working poor, people wore most of their clothes to bed, including scarves and overcoats. You flex your toes. They're present. That's about all you can say for them. Numb, but present. One bedmate has curled into a tight ball like a shrimp. Another's foot has somehow wedged itself under your thigh and radiates the heat of a baked potato. You consider making a pillow out of it. The cold does something to your dreams. It shortens them, breaks them up. You wake more often. Sometimes you feel like you never fully slept. You drift, then surface. Drift again. It's like floating on an icy pond and never quite sinking in. Victorian medical journals warned about night chills, which were blamed for everything from bad tempers to rheumatism. Entire industries sprang up around bedtime health. Special woolen mittens, ear-warming caps, even fur-lined nose protectors. Yes, nose cozies were a thing. You consider whether you'd look good in one. You decide you would. Historians still puzzle over just how much of Victorian sleep was sleep at all. With multiple interruptions, chamber pots, fires going out, bedmates rolling over, distant street noise. Many people never experienced the deep, sustained sleep we take for granted today. Some scholars even suggest that segmented sleep, 2 shorter sleeps with a waking period in between, was the norm. Which makes sense. You're lying here, half awake, teeth clenched, wondering if the fire can be revived. Maybe someone else will get up. Maybe Ellen, the servant girl from before, will creak through her passage and quietly relight it. But she's probably sleeping too, or lying very still in her cupboard-sized cot, trying not to shiver herself awake. You think about the fire. You think about the warmth it could offer. Then you think about the effort it would take to crawl out of this bed and down 2 creaking staircases into the freezing dark. You choose survival. You burrow deeper. Somewhere, another bed creaks. Someone coughs. A bell chimes in the hallway, distant but real. The house is beginning to stir, but not you. Not yet. You have frost to admire. Blankets to reclaim, and maybe, if the cold lets up, a few more minutes of shallow, dreamy dozing before reality pulls the covers off entirely. Something just brushed your leg. You're not sure what. You're not even sure if it was on the bed or under the bed. But it definitely moved. And now you are very much awake, your body frozen in that very specific Victorian mix of sleep-deprived, chilled, and mildly terrified. Don't panic. This is normal. In the average Victorian bedroom, you're never alone. Not just because of bedmates, not just because of the groaning old walls, but because beds were ecosystems. Living, breathing, itching, scuttling ecosystems. Welcome to the insect portion of tonight's history lesson. You know how we romanticize old houses? The creaky floors, the candlelight, the charming old beds? Yeah, none of that included the lice, fleas, and bed bugs that ruled the mattress like tiny monarchs. You were more likely to wake up scratching than sighing dreamily. Even middle-class homes, scrubbed and laundered as they were, battled constant infestations. Sheets were boiled, mattresses were aired, often flung over balcony rails and beaten with sticks. Bed frames were doused in vinegar and, in especially desperate homes, kerosene, just not lit, most of the time. Historians still argue whether Victorian hygiene improved dramatically over the century or merely adapted to ever-multiplying creatures. Did more soap really help, or did people just get better at pretending they weren't crawling? Tonight, in your lumpy bed, you've got company. There's the potential for bed bugs along the seams, fleas from the family dog who sometimes sleeps under the bed, and maybe, if you're staying in a rural area, a mouse nesting somewhere in the walls. Oh, and the groans? That's not a ghost, that's the furniture, or the pipes, or maybe it is a ghost. This is the Victorian era, after all. Everyone believes in them. You certainly do now. But let's stay grounded, because there are more tangible things to worry about than phantoms. Like how often mattresses were reused. When someone died of typhus or tuberculosis or one of those beautifully 19th century sounding afflictions like consumption of the lungs, their bed might be passed on to you. Mattresses were rarely replaced. Why would they be? Straw could be restuffed, fabric could be patched. Never mind that someone literally coughed themselves into eternity on that same ticking last winter. You're told it's fine, and in this world, fine is a relative term. One quirky tidbit from the period: people believed that air at night was dangerous. Night air, as they called it, was thought to carry illness, so windows were sealed tight. And yet, there's something strangely comforting about all this chaos. Every groan, every rustle, every midnight cough is part of a nightly rhythm. You're in a house that breathes, that twitches, that never truly sleeps. You remember the nursery rhyme someone murmured yesterday evening. Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite. Turns out, that wasn't metaphorical. People genuinely tightened the ropes of their bed frames before sleep. Old rope beds would sag without regular adjustment, so you'd pull them taut, like tuning an instrument. Sleep tight meant exactly that. Sleep on a properly stretched sleeping surface. The bugs? Oh, they were very real. You pull the blanket up over your head, momentarily entombing yourself in musty flannel and your own increasingly dramatic thoughts. Under here, it's warmer, slightly. The itch on your ankle returns. You scratch it carefully, half praying it's a loose thread and not a multi-legged squatter. In a different part of the house, probably the scullery, Ellen is dumping ash into the stove. You can hear it faintly, the clink of metal, the hollow whoosh of soot. She's awake before everyone, as usual. Has been for hours, probably. Servants in houses like this rarely got enough sleep to dream, let alone scratch. But she has her own insect war stories. In servants' quarters, pests were worse. The hidden spots, the reused blankets, the heat from the kitchen attracting vermin of all sizes. The phrase rat trap was not poetic. It was standard equipment. Historians still debate whether Victorian homes were dirtier by neglect or simply because sanitation hadn't caught up with population density. Either way, your bedroom's not clean by modern standards. It's cozy, it's lived in, it's grimy in the corners, and there's probably a spider above the headboard watching you right now. You sigh, rolling onto your back again. The ceiling looms, wooden beams crossing above like ribs in a sleeping beast. One bedmate snorts awake, then settles. Another mumbles something about buttons. You decide not to ask. And then you hear it. The softest skitter beneath the bed. It's fine. Probably nothing. Definitely not a rat. Probably a very polite, non-intrusive mouse, just going about its business. Maybe he's cold too. Maybe he's here to tuck you in. You smile at the absurdity. Because in this moment, with the cold, the itch, the creaking and scratching and breathing and shivering, you wake up, sort of, to the sound of slippers slapping down a hallway. Then, the distant clink of a teacup. Then, the unmistakable swish of skirts. It's early, but not too early. Late enough that the rich folk are rising. You're not one of them, of course. But today, let's pretend. Today, you're waking up in one of the nicer rooms, in a bigger house, under thicker blankets. You got lace on the windows, matching pillowcases, and, get this, a bed all to yourself. Well, kind of. Because even in the fanciest homes, people still shared. Maybe not with siblings or hired lodgers, but with spouses, siblings, cousins visiting from out of town, or your maid lying silently on the rug by the fire, pretending not to exist. It's easy to romanticize Victorian luxury. The velvet drapes, the polished walnut furniture, the satin coverlets that shimmer when the morning light hits them just right. But even the aristocrats lived under certain shared assumptions, and one of those was this: nobody really sleeps alone. In your fancy bed, you shift slightly, enjoying the creak of expensive frame joints. The mattress is stuffed with goose feathers instead of straw. The sheets are cool linen, and the person curled next to you, your spouse perhaps, is asleep, mouth slightly open, hair somehow still perfect. And yet, it's not silent. That's because you've got a bell pull, a little velvet cord hanging beside the bed. Pull it, and somewhere below, a bell will jingle, and a maid will rise from her straw mattress to bring you warm water or a tray of tea. You consider it. Your fingers reach for the cord. Then, you think better of it. Ellen deserves 10 more minutes. Servants were almost always within reach of their employers, especially at night. It was common for a lady's maid to sleep in a side room, or even on a cot at the foot of her mistress's bed, and if she was lucky, she got a blanket. Historians still discuss whether this close proximity was about convenience or control. Did wealthy Victorians truly believe they needed midnight assistance that urgently? Or was it about establishing dominance, even in sleep? In some cases, servants were used quite literally as foot warmers. Children, too, sometimes. You'd place a smaller body under the covers at the end of the bed, not for affection, but for insulation. Imagine being 9 years old and waking up with someone's boots on your back. Good morning, indeed. And the warmth. My goodness, the obsession with warmth. If you were wealthy, you didn't just have one blanket. You had layers, quilted counterpanes, heavy wool throws, silk eiderdowns. Some houses even had early warming devices, a copper. One particularly quirky trend among the upper class? Sleeping with pets. Not just small lapdogs, but the occasional well-groomed cat, or even a prized bird in a cage by the bed. Parrots were especially fashionable. Imagine waking to the sound of a bored cockatoo repeating the housemaid's curses. And yet, luxury didn't always mean comfort. Despite the finery, you were still contending with flickering gas lights, drafty corridors, and a heating system that required someone else to risk third-degree burns. You might sleep in a canopied bed, but the canopy could trap smoke from your fire. Or worse, block airflow in an already stuffy room sealed tight against night air. Also, silk sheets may sound divine, but in the winter, they feel like lying on cold pudding. Linen was preferred, breathable, crisp, and easy to boil. You turn your head slightly and admire the view. A carved headboard, the soft rustle of drapes in a room that smells faintly of rosewater and firewood. There's a washstand in the corner, and your clothes folded neatly by a maid who was up an hour before you. Still, you're not exactly alone. Someone's always nearby. Someone's always listening for your bell, fetching your slipper, fluffing your pillow, trimming the wick. Even among the rich, privacy was negotiable. Bedrooms were places of formality. You might hold meetings there, write letters, receive visitors while still in your nightgown. There's a record of one Victorian gentleman signing legal documents in bed while his valet laced his boots. Talk about multitasking. Historians still argue whether Victorian sleep habits were built more around actual rest or around the performance of rest. You didn't just sleep. You retired. You had routines, procedures, people to help you prepare for bed. Powder your face, button your nightgown, braid your hair into exactly the right sleep-safe configuration. And once you were in bed, that didn't mean peace. Your spouse might be snoring like a wheezy accordion. A maid might knock to remind you of a visitor arriving at noon. Somewhere in the hall, a floorboard squeals. A distant baby cries in the nursery. The house never truly stops. Still, you sigh and let yourself melt into the mattress. It's softer than the ones you've known in the servants' wing. Your fingers trace the embroidery on the sheet, little vines twisting around initials you barely remember. You've got warmth, space, even a down pillow with lace trim. And yet, you still miss something. Maybe the lull of whispered stories from a shared bed. Maybe the soft rhythm of 3 siblings snoring in harmony. Maybe just the strange, inevitable comfort of knowing you were surrounded by family, by footsteps, by people breathing in the dark. Luxury is lovely, but there's something about shared sleep, however cold, however cramped, that made you feel like part of something bigger than yourself. A tangle of limbs, a cluster of dreams, a chorus of snores, all working in concert to remind you you're never really alone in a Victorian house.
You jolt upright, not because of a nightmare,
Though, yes, someone did just mutter something about the woman in the mirror. No, you're up because someone rolled onto your face. It's your turn now, in the bustling, sniffling, wheeze symphony of a Victorian boarding house. Welcome to the era of the rented bed. This isn't a family home. It's a lodging house. A cheap one. You don't own this bed. You're renting it by the night, by the shift, sometimes even by the hour. Yes, really. Bed sharing here isn't just customary. It's business. You're in London, let's say, or maybe Manchester, in a long, narrow room with rows of beds lined up like loaves of bread. You're squeezed into one with a stranger, maybe two strangers. You all came here for the same reason, to not sleep outside. One man mumbles something about the factory bell. Another scratches under the blanket like he's digging to Australia. You decide very quickly to avoid eye contact and try to face the wall, which offers a charming view of peeling plaster and what may or may not be a squashed bug fossilized in candle wax. Historians still argue over how widespread hot bedding really was. That's the practice where one person gets up and another slides in while the sheets are still warm. Some scholars insist it was mostly urban legend. Others point to stacks of boarding house records and enough satirical illustrations to suggest otherwise. Either way, it's been long enough that we can all agree. It was gross, and it was real. You hear a snore that could shatter glass, then a cough, then someone sitting up on the bed next to yours and spitting loudly into a bowl. Ah, the breakfast routine. In lodging houses, privacy didn't exist. Curtains, if they were present, were symbolic. You bathed in shared wash basins, and your nightstand was often a box with someone else's socks in it. You learned to sleep with your shoes tied to your belt and one eye on your hat. But people adapted. There was an etiquette, unspoken, but ironclad. No questions, no loud arguments. If your bedmate twitched in their sleep or whimpered mid-dream, you ignored it. You both had enough problems. And if you were lucky, they didn't snore too loud or kick in their sleep. That was worth extra. One quirky tale goes that a traveling chimney sweep once shared a boarding house bunk with a local tax clerk. They didn't speak a word to each other for 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, the clerk rolled over and casually asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" The sweep got up and slept on the floor. You shuffle your feet, seeking a spot that doesn't feel like a loaf of stale bread. The mattress has collapsed in the middle. You and your bedmate keep sliding toward each other like noodles in a too small pot. And yet, you're grateful. This place, cheap, grimy, loud, is still safer than the alternatives. Outside, it's damp and foggy. People sleep under newspapers or in stables. And even those places are getting crowded. In here, you've got a roof, a wall, a blanket, and half of a pillow that smells vaguely of coal tar and lemons. You pull the blanket tighter. Someone across the room is muttering in their sleep again, something about debts, something about apples. It fades, replaced by the rhythmic thud of someone's boots being removed in the hallway. This particular boarding house, like many others, probably used rotating occupancy. The day shift workers get the beds at night. The night shift workers climb in come morning. Sheets aren't changed. Names aren't always remembered. You just pay your coin, claim your side, and hope you don't wake up with a stranger's beard tickling your cheek. Historians still argue whether this system was a reflection of industrial efficiency or urban desperation. Was hot bedding smart economics or a last-ditch human stacking method? Whatever the truth, it tells you something important. Victorian society had zero chill about sleep. You got it however, wherever, and with whomever you could. And you, lucky you, have become an expert at the sideways shuffle. You find the hollow of the mattress and slide in like a puzzle piece. Your knees bump against something warm. You freeze. Then sigh. just a shin. Could be worse. You try to ignore the smell of boiled cabbage drifting up through the floorboards, or maybe it's feet, or a very tired stew from yesterday's dinner bubbling into today's breakfast. There's a bucket in the corner that you really don't want to think about. You get up to use it, but that means waking your bunkmate. And the rule here is simple. Don't wake the others. That's how fights start, or coughing fits, or worse, conversation. So you lie still. You breathe shallowly. You close your eyes and let your mind wander to warmer places, private places, invented places, a room of your own, a bed with corners that don't sag, a pillow that only has your drool on it. But for now, you share. You share heat, space, germs, and probably dreams. You become part of the rotating rhythm of an industrial city trying to sleep in shifts. And eventually, despite everything, the rustling, the snoring, the occasional cough, you drift off. Because even in a bed that isn't yours, with a stranger's elbow nestled dangerously close to your face, your body knows it's better than being out in the cold. Your eyes flutter open to find yourself entangled in someone's elbow and a wool blanket that's trying to escape the bed. Again. But before you can shift or sigh or even fully remember where you are, something remarkable happens. You feel warm. Not just physically. Deep, bone-level, soul-wrapped warmth. That's because tonight's bed is special. This one is steeped in pseudoscience, moral philosophy, and more than a little wishful thinking. Welcome to the strange Victorian belief that sleeping next to someone was good for your health. Yes, really. You've heard of crystals and moon water. Now meet thermosympathetic alignment. In an age when medical knowledge was just learning to wash its hands, Victorians often turned to theories that sounded scientific but were actually more vibes than facts. One of the most persistent? That body heat, especially shared, well-distributed, full-length body contact heat, had curative powers. Doctors, preachers, and advice manuals all chimed in. Feeling melancholy? Get into bed with someone cheerful. Have a nervous condition? Try the calming effect of a relative's chest rising and falling beside yours. Insomnia? Try synchronizing your breath with your spouse's. Just ignore the part where they keep talking in their sleep about fish markets. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were earnest medical theories or social justifications for behaviors already baked into necessity. Was co-sleeping healthy because it worked, or because it was unavoidable? Regardless, the idea spread like warm butter. Entire books were published on the moral benefits of sleep companionship. Some claimed that children who slept alone were more likely to develop distant personalities. Others swore that marital intimacy required nightly proximity, not for romance, but for emotional resonance. You shift slightly. Your bedmate, who may be your spouse, your sister, or just Margaret from down the hall who was visiting for the week and didn't want to sleep near the drafty window, grunts and continues drooling peacefully on the pillow. You try not to disturb the energy field. Because the Victorian sleep health model had rules. For starters, touching was encouraged, not in a cuddle pile way, more like be aware of each other's spiritual temperature. According to one popular pamphlet from 1864, no better balm for the overburdened heart exists than the proximity of a kindly soul and a warm rib cage. They said things differently back then. There was also a belief that body heat could absorb sadness, that simply by lying near a depressed relative you could lighten their internal weight. Parents tucked children in tight between them, not just for warmth, but to ensure a gentle transfer of cheerful vapors. You're not making this up, neither am I. Two brothers who'd fought that day might be made to sleep, side by side, as proximity mends quarrels. A widow might share a bed with her adult daughter during mourning to ease the ache of loss. Soldiers slept in tight ranks, not just to conserve space, but because many believed synchronized breathing kept morale high. Of course, there were skeptics. Medical journals questioned whether these ideas had any basis. One London physician famously declared that shared sleep merely increased the transmission of colds, lice, and regrettable opinions. He was not invited back to the journal. Still, the belief held firm, particularly in rural areas. Sleeping alone was seen as odd, cold, possibly dangerous. If a child didn't want to share a bed, something was off. Solitude was a red flag. This extended to babies, too. Cribs existed, yes, but many infants spent their early years nestled in the crook of a parent's arm or tucked between siblings. Victorian doctors even argued over whether babies who slept alone might develop willfulness, and we can't have that. So, you lie still, listening to the gentle rhythm of your companion's breathing. You can feel it, slow, steady, oddly reassuring. Your legs are tangled. Your feet are warm. Somewhere, a church bell rings twice. You don't move. And in this moment, you get it. Despite the itchy sheets, the creaking mattress, and the suspicious rustle under the bed, you feel better. Not because of essential oils or a spine-aligning mattress, but because there's a human beside you, alive, breathing, sharing. It's cozy, in that vaguely suffocating way. You let your eyes drift closed again. The theories swirl in your half-sleeping brain. Maybe you are absorbing a cheerful vapor. Maybe your soul is aligning with Margaret's. Maybe this ribcage is the best balm for your overburdened heart. Or maybe it's just finally warm. The night stretches on, and your half-dreams blur into one another. Foggy scenes of walking through crowded alleys in your nightgown, losing a slipper in a snowdrift, trying to find a bed that hasn't already been claimed by a stranger or a chicken. You turn your head on the pillow, half-conscious, and realize with sudden dread someone is whistling through their nose. You're back in a typical Victorian bedroom, somewhere between midnight and dawn, and the nasal concert beside you is building to a full crescendo. You open one eye. The bed is packed, 3 across and 1 perpendicular at the foot, like a very sleepy game of Tetris. And all of them are noisy. Let's talk about bedtime fashion, and all the sounds that came with it. You glance down and find yourself wrapped in a voluminous nightgown. It's long, it's heavy, it's white, with tiny buttons down the front. And somehow, it manages to be both scratchy and slightly damp. Victorian nightwear wasn't made for style, it was made for coverage. Your ankles are hidden, your wrists are swaddled, even your neck might be trapped beneath a modest ruffle buttoned right up to your dreams. Historians still debate how much of this was about modesty versus sheer necessity. Was the full-length nightgown a moral shield, or just another layer against the cold? Probably both. Either way, it wasn't optional, unless you wanted to be branded as either scandalous or freezing. Next to you, someone shifts in their own towering gown. It sounds like 2 sheets of parchment doing battle. Then comes the cough, then the snore. Then, in the corner, someone lets out a polite but clearly audible sigh and begins what can only be described as a wheezing lullaby. Because yes, Victorian sleep was noisy. A bed wasn't quiet. A room wasn't silent. The symphony included coughing, shifting, mumbling, muttering, the occasional gas escape, and, most notably, the iconic nose whistle. This was partly the result of the era's excellent access to airborne pollutants. Coal smoke, industrial soot, animal dander, dried rose petals stuffed into pillows. Your sinuses never stood a chance. You, dear sleeper, are a wind instrument in the orchestra of midnight complaints. But it wasn't just the noises of the body, it was the rituals. You reach for the little table beside the bed. On it sits your candle stub, your folded cap, and yes, your nightcap. Not the drink, though that too existed, but the actual floppy hat. Made of cotton or wool, it keeps your head warm, your hair in place, and your dreams fashionably contained. Victorian men often wore pointed caps. Women favored rounder versions, sometimes trimmed with lace. And let's be honest, they looked ridiculous. But in a world without central heating, dignity came second to not losing an ear to frostbite. One fringe item still floating around your dream-fogged mind: nose warmers. Yes, nose warmers. Tiny knitted caps for the tip of your nose, attached with string behind the ears. They were mostly worn by the old, the ill, or the deeply, deeply cold. You picture yourself in one now, with your snoring bedmate donning a matching pair. Stylish. You glance around the room. Someone has kicked off their blanket. Someone else has turned sideways and is now sleeping with their head at the footboard, apparently seeking better airflow. Another has tucked their nightgown sleeves into their sleeves, like a cocoon. It's an absurd ballet, performed nightly in cotton and flannel. Historians still argue whether these eccentric sleep rituals reflect health concerns or simple adaptation to discomfort. Were people really so fragile? Or just incredibly creative with solutions to cold, noise, and overcrowding? Your attention shifts to a corner shelf where a pair of chamber sticks rest beside a china bowl. That's your basin for morning splashes. You also spot a bottle of soothing syrup, a concoction likely laced with opium, given to children to help them sleep. You decide not to touch it. Back in bed, the nasal whistling has hit a high pitch. You try breathing in sync, then out of sync. Nothing helps. You reach for the blanket and bury your ears. It doesn't work. You can still hear it, like a haunted kettle. You focus on something else. The smell, maybe. A mixture of lavender sachets, coal dust, stale tea, foot ointment, and something vaguely herbal. It's not unpleasant, just very Victorian. You inhale deeply and try not to think about how much of it is embedded into the sheets. And then, just as you start to drift again, someone starts talking. Not loudly, not clearly, but unmistakably. A gentle muttering, like a priest reciting a sermon from underwater. You catch a few words. Buttons. Stolen pig. No, the cabbage was mine. And then a soft, open-mouthed snore. This is what passes for a lullaby now. You surrender. You allow yourself to float in this noisy, bundled, chaotic sleep. You tuck your cap down over your ears. You wrap your arms inside your nightgown like you're folding in on yourself. You smile, faintly, at the absurdity. Because somehow, despite the flannel, the fog, the chorus of wheezes and murmurs, you feel at peace. You're not alone. You're exactly where you belong. Welcome to Victorian bedtime fashion, where silence is a myth and the sounds of sleep are as familiar as the clothes on your back. You dream of silence, but instead, you wake to shouting. Not angry shouting, just urgent, bureaucratic, early morning noise. Boots thumping across floorboards, a kettle whistling itself into a frenzy, a child crying somewhere far too close, and a voice, deep and serious, reading out names like a military roll call. It's barely past dawn, but the house is already alive. You blink. You're not in a family bedroom tonight. You're not in a genteel townhouse. You're on a mattress in the back room of a Victorian household during wartime, and beds are about to get very crowded. Victorian sleep was never private, but during national emergencies, wars, famines, epidemics, sleeping arrangements could stretch into full-blown human Tetris. Cousins arrived, widows moved in. Entire orphaned families were absorbed like rainwater into any household with a spare blanket. And sometimes, not even that. Tonight, you're one of many. The bed creaks as you sit up. Around you, 3 others stir. You're not even sure who half of them are. One is a cousin from Bristol, maybe. Another might be an evacuee, sent from the city because someone decided rural life would be healthier. As if rationed porridge and unwashed goats equaled medical improvement. You give a polite nod and shift your legs over the edge of the bed. Your socks are gone. You suspect the dog took them. Or maybe the small child snoring on the floor beside a heap of folded potato sacks. Historians still argue how much wartime disrupted domestic sleep. Some say it brought families closer, reunited over shared hardship. Others say it fractured households, jammed too many bodies into too few spaces, and left long-lasting psychological scars, probably both. But one thing's for sure. Nobody had personal space. You reach for a tin mug of yesterday's tea. It's lukewarm and vaguely metallic, but it does the job. Someone groans. Someone else sneezes. You count 5 visible bodies in the room, not including the pair of feet sticking out from under the curtained washstand. One of the more overlooked realities of wartime life was just how many people had to co-sleep with whoever was available. During the Crimean War, entire families took in injured soldiers. During cholera outbreaks, the sick were laid in the same bed as the healthy, under the hopeful superstition that heat heals. And during the Irish famine, many families slept 10 or more to a room, half of them already too weak to move. You lie back down, only to find someone else has already taken your spot. A toddler, specifically. He blinks up at you, wipes his nose on your blanket, and goes back to sleep. You sigh and find a new corner. During the Victorian era, makeshift beds became a way of life. Tables were cleared. Even those considered upper class weren't immune. Letters from the time describe drawing rooms converted into temporary dormitories, where nephews from the city shared sofas with elderly aunts and spinster cousins. A bracing arrangement, one diarist wrote, but not conducive to tranquility. You wrap your shawl tighter. The fire's out, again. You consider rebuilding it, but realize quickly there's no fuel. The coal ration was used up yesterday. Someone suggests burning old newspapers. Someone else is already tearing them into strips. A young girl coughs in the corner. Another voice murmurs something about mustard plasters. You pretend to be asleep. It's safer that way. One quirky invention born of these cramped quarters? Folding cots on wheels. Advertised in catalogs as collapsible gentlemen's beds, they promised comfort and discretion, until they inevitably squeaked loud enough to wake the entire street. You saw one yesterday. It folded itself mid-use and deposited its occupant directly onto the cat. You don't have one of those. You have a mattress made of horsehair and regret. You shift again, trying not to crush someone's elbow beneath you. And still, somehow, there's comfort. These aren't just house guests. They're survivors, fellow humans making the best of bad times. You listen to the shared breathing, the way people sigh in sync, the quiet words passed between cots. We'll manage, just until spring. There's stew left, I think. You let your eyes close again. Historians still debate whether the Victorian ideal of family closeness was forged in these crowded moments. Did we become more communal because we were forced to? Or did people cling tighter, even when space allowed, out of some deep need to feel needed? The answer doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're warm, pressed against a stranger turned roommate, while a dog snores somewhere beneath the bed. In wartime, nobody has their own room. Nobody gets 8 hours. But everybody, in their own way, is holding each other up. Sometimes literally, sometimes just with the weight of shared blankets and the occasional muttered, "Move over, you're hogging the pillow." You shift once more. The toddler has moved to your hip. The cousin from Bristol is murmuring about jam. Outside, a rooster crows, far too enthusiastically. It's morning in the Victorian era. You didn't sleep well. You didn't sleep alone. But you slept. And that's something. There's a chill in the room that has nothing to do with the weather. You wake to it, before the birds, before the fire. It creeps under the door, curls beneath your blanket, and settles somewhere behind your spine. You're not sure what time it is, but something's off. You lie very still. You're sleeping in the attic room tonight. Sloped ceiling, one tiny round window. Just you, the draft, and a bed that creaks in a different octave than the ones downstairs. You wouldn't have chosen this room, but someone else needed the better spot. You didn't argue, not once you heard the stories. You glance across the shadows. The other bed is empty. Or maybe it isn't. The darkness seems thicker over there, and it feels, what's the word? Watched. Welcome to the Victorian fascination with spiritual roommates. This is the era when ghosts weren't just Halloween decorations. They were real, they were everywhere, and most importantly, they were nocturnal. The Victorians believed that night was when the boundary between this world and the next wore thin, especially around the bed. Historians still argue how seriously these beliefs were taken. Were they literal fears, romantic metaphors, clever ways to explain things that went bump in the night, or just the creaks of old houses and the burps of bad stew? What we do know is that the Victorians took their ghosts seriously. You've probably heard of seances, parlors filled with trembling hands, candlelight, and whispers of the beyond. But what you may not know is that ghosts were often believed to appear in bedrooms, hovering at the foot of the bed, drifting silently through keyholes, or, most dreadfully, sitting on your chest while you slept. You stare at the ceiling and try not to think about that. Your bedmate last night, Margaret again, always a treat, swore she felt her grandmother stroke her cheek in the dark. "It wasn't scary," she said with too much confidence. "She was just checking I was warm enough." Comforting. The Victorian home was a place of intense superstition. Mirrors were covered after a death to prevent the spirit of the departed from getting trapped. Clocks were stopped at the moment of passing. Some people placed a bowl of salt at the bedside to repel bad spirits or hung iron nails behind the bedhead for protection. You check. No salt here. Just a wooden crucifix, a single beeswax candle, and a cracked ceramic pitcher of water. The water shimmers faintly, though nothing has moved. Probably just the wind. Probably. One fringe belief held that ghosts preferred feather beds, too soft to resist, apparently. You're lying on straw tonight. That might be a blessing. A chill gusts through the room. You pull the blanket higher. Someone is walking upstairs, or maybe not walking, pacing back and forth, slow and deliberate. The floorboards groan in protest. You wait. The footsteps stop. You lie perfectly still, heart thudding, suddenly very aware of every sound. The settling of wood, the slow drip from the corner basin. Your own breath, shallow now. You tell yourself it's nothing. But the Victorians wouldn't have dismissed it. They'd have thrown open the Bible, mumbled a prayer, or rung a bell. Yes, bell ringing was a thing. Tiny spirit bells said to drive away ghosts. You don't have one. Just your imagination, and Margaret's snore echoing faintly from the floor below. Historians still debate whether these bedroom hauntings were dreams, tricks of the firelight, or genuine attempts to process grief in a deeply spiritual time. Victorian life was steeped in death, child mortality, illness, accidents. Most people had lost someone. Many, many someones. Of course, they believed the dead came back. Who wouldn't want to believe their loved ones were near? You remember a story your aunt told last week. A cousin had been sharing a bed with her husband when she felt him get up in the night. She opened her eyes. Empty room. He'd died 3 days earlier. She moved out that afternoon. You close your eyes. You tell yourself it's just an old house, just the wind, just too many layers of flannel and not enough coffee. But you also find yourself whispering a little just-in-case prayer, just under your breath, like they did, like they still do. Because tonight, in this place, it's not hard to believe you're not entirely alone. And somehow, that's not so bad. Because whether it's a memory, a ghost, or just a dream left over from someone else's bedtime, there's comfort in knowing that sleep isn't always silent. That someone, something, might be watching over you, or possibly just judging your posture. Either way, you smile, close your eyes, and let the night finish folding over you like a second blanket. You wake up with your face pressed into someone's back. Again. There's a shoulder in your ribs, an elbow poking somewhere it absolutely shouldn't, and the distinct, unmistakable smell of overcooked cabbage still lingering in the shared blanket. You breathe in slowly and tell yourself, it's fine. This is Victorian etiquette. Because tonight's dreamscape takes you through one of the strangest contradictions of the 19th century. How obsessed the Victorians were with sleeping properly, even when squished like sardines. Politeness didn't stop at the dinner table. It followed you under the covers. In fact, Victorian etiquette manuals were filled with rules for how to behave during sleep, especially when you weren't sleeping alone, which, as we've now thoroughly established, was nearly always. These books had entire chapters on how to share a bed with grace, dignity, and moral superiority. Rule 1. Never turn your back too directly. It was considered rude, as if you were intentionally snubbing your bedmate. But also, don't face them too directly, because that might be too familiar. So basically, stare at the ceiling and pray you don't sneeze. Historians still argue whether these etiquette codes were strictly followed or more like societal aspirations. But people certainly tried. In boarding schools, servants' quarters, or family bedrooms, proper sleeping behavior was drilled into children like algebra. Don't hog the blanket. Don't talk too loud. Don't ever kick. And most importantly, keep your virtue tucked in as tightly as your nightshirt. Especially for women. If you were a young lady, modesty wasn't something you wore. It was something you slept inside. Loose hair? Scandalous. Bare feet? Questionable. Sharing a bed with anyone of the opposite sex, even a cousin, required parental approval, a shared understanding, and at least 2 feet of no-touching space, preferably buffered by a strategically placed pillow. You shift slightly in the bed. There's no pillow buffer. Your current roommate has one leg draped over yours and is softly humming a tune that may or may not be about sausage. Still, you keep your posture neutral and your hands folded neatly over your chest, just like the book says. Etiquette extended beyond the bedroom, too. Morning after behavior was key. You were expected to rise without disturbing others, fold your nightwear discreetly, and never ever discuss anyone else's snoring. It was considered deeply impolite to mention nocturnal noises, even if someone honked like a foghorn the entire night. One fringe etiquette trend: sleep diaries. Some genteel Victorians kept written records of their dreams and sleep posture to track. Nightgowns were carefully designed to walk the razor's edge between warmth and modesty. Nothing sheer, no lace above the knee, and heaven forbid anything short enough to reveal a calf while climbing into bed. For men, long nightshirts were preferred, but even those had to be buttoned all the way to the neck if you wanted to avoid becoming the topic of awkward breakfast conversation. You shift again. Your bedmate sighs. Someone across the room sneezes and mutters a half apology. You hear the telltale creak of a chamber pot lid being lifted. The ritual continues. Even in a room full of bodies, siblings, boarders, strangers, there was an understanding. You had to pretend you weren't all smushed together. Pretend you were refined. Pretend you had space. Pretend, always, that sleep was a genteel, orderly affair, when in reality it was a tangle of elbows, dreams, creaking joints, and awkward morning-after nods over porridge. Etiquette guides sometimes address the truly horrifying. What to do if you rolled over and accidentally touched someone? The answer? Freeze. Immediately retreat. Do not acknowledge it. If the other person wakes up, apologize as if you had accidentally borrowed their cow. There were also rules for sleep talking. If you heard someone reveal something juicy mid-dream, like where they hid their money or what they really thought of Aunt Agnes, you were supposed to pretend you hadn't heard it. To bring it up later was considered a deep breach of trust. Victorian bedrooms were, ironically, full of secrets that everyone knew but never mentioned. Historians still puzzle over this paradox. A society obsessed with virtue, yet living cheek to jowl with their entire extended family every night. How do you uphold propriety when 3 of your cousins are snoring inches from your face and someone's toe is stuck in your nightgown hem? You just do. You learn to move quietly, speak gently, and pretend the dog didn't just burp in its sleep under your bed. And somehow, amidst all this careful choreography, people found peace. Sleep, for all its awkwardness, still wrapped them up, still carried them, still restored them. You sigh and adjust the blanket. Your bedmate rolls away, finally. The warmth remains. You stare up at the ceiling beams and let yourself drift again. Because even in a house of whispers, of creaking beds and whispered etiquette, your body knows the rules. Lie still. Be polite. Don't steal the covers. And never, never mention the nose whistle. Your face is pressed against a wooden drawer. Not beside it. Not leaning near it. In it. Because tonight, you are sleeping where many poor Victorian children slept, in furniture that was never meant to hold people. Welcome to the bottom drawer. The mattress is an old coat. The pillow is a folded burlap sack. You've been tucked in under a shawl, wedged between your sister's boots, and a half-used bar of yellow soap. You're not uncomfortable, exactly. You're just very aware that if someone tries to open this chest of drawers, you'll be re-shelved. And honestly, it's not the worst night's sleep you've had. If your family is poor, and most were, then beds are a luxury reserved for adults, guests, or anyone currently sick. That means kids, especially little ones, got creative. Drawers, cupboards, barrels padded with rags, even empty flower bins were all pressed into service as beds, not because it was charming, because it was necessary. Historians still argue how widespread this practice was. Some claim it was limited to urban slums. Others point to rural diaries that mention the baby sleeping in the dresser as casually as mentioning tea. Either way, the evidence is clear. For many Victorians, sleeping in furniture was perfectly normal. You shift slightly. The drawer groans. Not in a spooky attic ghost way, more in a please don't move or we both collapse way. You try not to breathe too deeply. The air in here tastes like dust, potatoes, and the faint scent of lavender soap that's seen better days. Above you, on the top bunk, read the actual bed. 2 of your older siblings are sleeping like crossed spoons. One of them mutters something about missing the soup line. You hear someone cough in the hallway. Maybe your aunt. Maybe someone staying with your family this week. Maybe a boarder paying 6 pence to lie on the kitchen floor. This is Victorian poverty. Not the picturesque kind you see on Christmas cards. The real kind, where every inch of a home gets used, day and night. Where chairs double as beds, where drawers become cribs, where the oven, once cooled, might be left open so someone can sleep near the last of the heat. Yes, children sometimes slept in ovens, and no, not while they were on. Usually. The iron ovens of the day retained heat long after the fire had gone out, making them one of the warmest spots in a freezing house. It was dangerous, of course, but in the face of bitter winters and no central heating, it was sometimes worth the risk. One quirky adaptation? Sleeping shelves, makeshift platforms built above fireplaces, doors, or cupboards. These were, even in wealthier homes, the nursery wasn't exactly luxurious. A single bed might hold 3 or 4 children, lined up like books on a shelf. And if you were the youngest? Drawer it was. Easy to tuck in, easy to remove, easy to ignore. Historians still debate whether this treatment was out of neglect or simply practicality. Was it harsh parenting, or just an efficient use of limited space? Some families genuinely did their best with what they had. Others didn't try much at all. In either case, kids learned early. You sleep where you fit. You doze off again, briefly, and dream of lying in a big feather bed with soft white sheets, a pile of cushions, and a tray of toast and jam waiting beside you. You are then rudely awakened by a wardrobe door creaking open, directly above your drawer. Someone's looking for their socks. You close your eyes tighter, because in this world, you don't get your own space, you borrow it. You slide into it, you curl, adapt, and shrink yourself to the dimensions of survival. And you learn to sleep through almost anything: coughs, creaks, footsteps, mice, midnight arguments, and wardrobe invasions. You shift your toes. They bump something solid, a tin cup. You reach for it. Water. Flat, slightly sooty, but not frozen. A small miracle. One of the most sobering realities of Victorian co-sleeping was its dark underbelly. Overcrowding led to accidents, suffocation, illness, fires caused by too many bodies too close to a single candle. These weren't isolated tragedies. They were common enough to make headlines. And yet, people kept crowding in. What else could they do? Still, amidst the hardship, there was a strange kind of tenderness. Older siblings made up bedtime stories. Parents sang lullabies as they tucked children into dresser drawers and onto piles of mended laundry. Even in poverty, sleep was something shared. Not just physically, but emotionally. You might not have had a room or a bed or even a blanket, but you had someone beside you, someone breathing, someone warm. You curl into yourself again, drawing the coat tighter. The floor creaks. A shadow passes by your drawer. A whispered goodnight follows. Maybe for you, maybe for someone else. Doesn't matter. You're not alone, just snug, in a drawer, like a tiny, dreaming book, waiting to be read. You dreamt a silence, again. Of a room with no creaks, no snores, no elbow in your back. Just space, stillness. A pillow, all to yourself. And now you're awake. You're sitting on a narrow bed in a narrow room, blinking at the unfamiliar luxury of it all. There's no one beside you, no one snoring, no one drooling on the other half of your blanket. You are, astonishingly, sleeping alone. And you know what that means? You've crossed into the future of Victorian sleeping, an age when solitude was no longer suspicious and privacy no longer a sin. But getting here took time. You're in the early stages of what reformers and architects once called the bedroom revolution, a slow, fussy, heavily opinionated transformation of domestic life. Because while for most of the Victorian era sleep meant sharing, of beds, rooms, even dreams, by the late 19th century a new idea was creeping in. People started dreaming of privacy. Historians still debate what sparked this shift. Was it new medical thinking that blamed poor sleep for everything from hysteria to indigestion? Was it the growing cult of individuality? Or simply the middle class expanding just enough to afford a second bedroom? Whatever the cause, solo sleeping became the gold standard, at least in theory. Advice columns began to scold parents who forced siblings to share. Sanitation experts warned about the dangers of breath mingling in closed rooms. And fiction, always a mirror, started romanticizing quiet, private spaces where characters could suffer in stylish, solitary agony. You stretch. The mattress creaks politely. The air smells faintly of linen and dust polish. There's a window with a latch, a real pillow, a nightstand with a vase of dry flowers and exactly one waxy orange. This isn't a palace. It's not even upper class, but it's yours. Mostly. Because, let's be honest, not everyone caught the privacy train. For every household that added a second bedroom, another still had 5 in one room. And while fashionable city flats boasted drawing rooms and ladies' retreats, poorer homes still crammed children wherever they fit: cupboards, drawers, ladders, lofts. The fantasy of solo sleep was spreading faster than the architecture could keep up. Even so, the expectation began to change. Children were encouraged to fall asleep alone. Girls were told that modesty meant keeping even siblings out of their bedroom. Boys were promised character development through solitary rest. The bed became more than furniture. It became a moral testing ground. Quirky side effect? The rise of bed accessories. If you were sleeping alone, you suddenly needed a... You lie back and stare at the ceiling. There's a water stain in one corner shaped like a turtle. You feel odd. Not bad, just aware. Because even though the mattress is yours and no one else is whispering next to you, your body still remembers. The rhythm of shared sleep, the warmth of elbows, the irritation of a sibling's foot kicking you at 3 a.m. You miss it a little. Solitude, after all, is quiet, but sometimes too quiet. Victorians struggled with this too. As privacy became more available, so did loneliness. Letters and diary entries mention the echo of empty sheets, the long silence before sleep, and even a shiver that comes from too much space. Turns out, once you've slept cheek to jowl for a decade or two, having a room of your own can feel unsettling. Historians still argue whether this new privacy brought more peace or more isolation. Was solo sleeping a triumph of personal freedom or a slow erosion of connection? You roll onto your side and pull the quilt up. It's soft, clean, yours. You think of the child in the drawer, the sisters sharing a cot, the grandmother in the corner bed who whispered stories in the dark. And you wonder, did we lose something in the name of sleeping alone? Or did we just swap one kind of comfort for another? There's no right answer. Just silence. And you, drifting off in a room built not for survival, or sharing, or spiritual vapors, but for rest. Simple, solitary rest. For now, that's enough. The candle burns low. You're in the last bed of the last room, in a house that finally feels quiet. No more shifting bodies, no more whispered prayers or midnight coughs. Just the soft tick of a clock somewhere downstairs and the steady hush of your own breath. You've made it to the end of the Victorian night. Not the end of sleep itself, but the end of how a whole society thought about it. Tonight's bed is wide enough for you alone. The blanket is yours, the silence too. It took centuries of elbows, whispered stories, ghostly cold spots, and drawer-cradled babies to get here, but here you are. You sit up slowly, legs over the edge of the bed, feet touching a rug instead of bare floorboards. The window is fogged with the first hint of morning, and even though no one's curled against your back, you swear you can still feel their shapes, like shadows pressed into memory. Because the truth is, no one in the Victorian world truly slept alone. They slept with siblings, servants, strangers, spouses. They slept beneath embroidered crosses and creaky beams, with ghosts, with guilt, with modesty buttoned tight, and a hot brick under the covers. They slept in drawers, cradles, haylofts, under stairs, in the arms of exhausted mothers, and the stray cat that refused to leave. And now, centuries later, we sleep in rooms with white noise machines and blackout curtains and the distant hum of refrigerators. But some part of you remembers. The weight of another body beside yours, the chorus of snores, the warmth of shared dreams. One final story comes to mind, a letter from 1898. A widower, writing to his daughter, says, "I sleep in the bed alone now, but I still leave space on the other side, just in case." He doesn't say for what, for whom, but the meaning is clear. It's hard to unlearn the comfort of another breath nearby. Historians still reflect on what we gained and lost when we began sleeping solo. Was it freedom or loneliness, sanity or silence too loud to bear? You tuck your legs back under the blanket, lie down. The pillow cradles your head like a promise. The quilt rises to your chin like a secret. You close your eyes and in the distance, just faintly, you can almost hear the echoes. The drawers, the bunkmates, the whispers through thin walls, the rhythm of a world learning how to rest. And as you begin to sink, finally, deeply, into the sleep you've earned, everything slows, even the questions. Let the blankets settle now. Let your breath lengthen. Let your limbs stretch gently, like they've grown weary of holding tension, like they've remembered how to be still. The house is quiet, finally. No bells ringing, no coal grates clattering, no one pacing upstairs or knocking through the panel wall. Just quiet. Just softness. Just the gentle weight of your body held by the mattress beneath you. There's no draft anymore, no cold nose, no need to worry about someone else rolling into your space. This is your space, your pillow, your story. And you've reached the end of it. But not the end of sleep, that's only just beginning. You can imagine the old bed frames now, carved, patched, handmade. The long nightshirts, the laughter muffled under quilts. The hush after a candle's blown out. The child in the drawer, the widow in the corner, the soldier on leave, all settling into dreams of their own. Somewhere in the past, they're all still there, sleeping, breathing, sharing warmth in a way that only hardship could teach. And now, so do you. Your breath is slow, your thoughts dim, your fingers relax one by one. The room fades, the world fades. There's nothing more to remember, nothing more to reach for. Only this quiet, only this rest. You're safe. You're still. You're here. Sleep well.